Hi, this is John Harding for EDL951, Fort Hays State University, Module 13, addressing tort law, tort liability, and selecting 5 cases that involve schools. I think I've got about 15 minutes, so I will try to move through this presentation fairly quickly, but address all the points. First of all, what is a tort? What is tort law? What is tort liability? A tort is a legal term that describes a violation where one person causes damage, injury, or harm to another person, and the liability is having to reimburse the victim for the harm that they have caused. So really there's 3 purposes: to provide relief to those who have been injured, it's to impose liability on those who are responsible for those injuries. The third part of that is to deter others from committing harmful acts. I think that's an important point. So when we see tort cases that are settled and there is a large penalty that goes along with those acts, we obviously as schools want to avoid that. When I was doing some research on this, I came across the Cornell University law site. They made a distinction between crimes and torts that I think was important. The purpose of tort laws is to address private wrongs and to compensate victims, whereas criminal law, the intent is to punish the wrongdoer, and I thought that was an important distinction for this assignment. When we look at some of the cases, the first case I chose was Massey versus Arcadia Unified School District. This had to do with faulty playground equipment. All schools, I think, have playground equipment, and as I go by schools or I visit schools, I often notice equipment that appears to be from the 70s or 80s or maybe even before. In this case, a young lady who was 6 years old was on a swing during an after-school program on school property when the S-hook that connected the swing to the frame broke. She fell to the ground, she fractured her skull. It resulted in a traumatic brain injury, and the school admitted a fault. They admitted they didn't change the S-hook to a U-bolt. They admitted that they didn't take the equipment out of commission and fix it properly. So as a result, they paid $3,750,000 to the parents. In terms of reactivity, what would we have done at our school? Probably the same thing. In terms of proactivity, what could we have done? Obviously, you want to check your equipment and probably check it more than just the beginning of the year. We're fortunate we just have a small playground. It wouldn't take long to check our 3 swing sets, but it's one reason that I want a new swing set. The presumption is that the equipment is safer, that it'll be easier to maintain, and it'll provide a better experience for the kids. But a good reminder in this case that we need to be proactive. I don't think an ethics policy would have made a huge difference in this case. This wasn't obviously something that was intentional, but a good reminder to say we want safe equipment and safe spaces for our kids. The second case I chose was called Pierce versus Marietta Valley USD. In this instance, the school hosted a party off-site at a swimming complex. There were a large number of students who were swimming. A 7th grader slipped beneath the waves, went to the bottom of the pool. He was unnoticed for some time. His peers eventually noticed him. They notified the lifeguards that were provided by the school district, even though it was off-site, but they didn't provide resuscitation or first aid. They just called 911. By the time he went to the hospital, he was pronounced dead. Tragic situation where the school then had to pay $11 million to the parents. In terms of a reactive approach, what would we have done? In a tragedy like this, there's not much you can do to right that wrong, but the court decided in this case that they owed the parents $11 million. In terms of proactivity, a lot of things to be proactive about. We have a pool here on our campus. Our students do swim as part of PE and as part of the dorm program. We have our own certified lifeguards, and we have a small number of students, but it's a great reminder to say, are the certifications in place? Is first aid available? Do we have safety equipment? Have we checked our drains and done proper maintenance on the pool? Those are always good reminders, good questions, and things for us to think about. Again, an ethics policy, in this case, I don't know would have made a difference. We have an ethical obligation as educators to provide safe environments, but an ethics policy may not have made a difference in this particular case. A third case that I chose was a roughhousing case. A teacher stepped out of her room for a few minutes. She asked an adjoining teacher to listen for any trouble. While she was gone, the students were wrestling. One student fell on top of another, broke his collarbone, it punctured an aorta, and ultimately that student died as a result. And the tort case came to be that the teacher was held not liable. In this case, they deemed it that the teacher was not responsible, but in terms of reminders, again, a reactive situation, we never want to be in a situation where we have teachers who are not providing supervision. I have had cases here where I've discovered teachers leaving the room and students in there unattended. The excuse is, I just stepped out for a minute. I needed to talk to somebody. I was going to be right back. But of course, those aren't acceptable answers, and we're responsible for every second. So we do not allow that here. And I think training at the beginning of the year to say this is something we can't have. If you need to step out of your room, you need to have another adult, preferably another teacher, covering for you, or call the office to ask for help. I think an ethics policy would have made a difference. Teachers understand that they cannot leave rooms or students unattended even for a few seconds. The fourth case was a local case recently where the ACLU, Civil Liberties Union, filed a suit against Shawnee Mission. At this particular instance, the students were demonstrating. They had an anti-gun rally, and the district decided to confiscate the cameras of students who were covering the rallies. They punished students for participating, and as a result, it went to court, and the district was required to have First Amendment training for all administrators. They were to adopt new policies for non-school sponsored events. They were to offer apologies and to make restitution. I think they had to pay $1 to the plaintiffs. So not a huge financial penalty, but a mistake that they had to rectify. I think free speech is something that can be addressed during training. I think it's important to review your policies and say, are these sorts of demonstrations disruptive? What is our response going to be? And are we impinging on the rights of students? This was a pretty high-profile case locally. And in our own school, we probably wouldn't have a situation quite like this, but it's possible. And we want to make sure we're understanding free speech rights of students. The last case was Peterson versus Baker. And in this particular instance, there was an altercation between a student and a teacher. The student wanted to leave the room. The teacher tried to prevent the student from leaving the room. At some point, she placed her hands on the neck of the student. The student escaped the hold, went to the office and reported the incident. And the tort case was filed against the teacher. She had resigned in the interim. Ultimately, it was determined that she was not liable for any injuries that occurred, and the case was settled. But I think, again, an ethics policy is important to remind teachers that we are not to physically engage students unless it is to protect ourselves or to protect other students if that's absolutely necessary, and then to have the proper training to do that. We use CPI. I know many schools use MANT training or CPI training. We've made it an emphasis here. So we do that every year, and then we have refresher trainings. Some of our students do have emotional issues, trauma issues, as most schools, and so we need to be cognizant about that. And I think reminding each other, supporting each other, and making sure that we engage in nonviolent responses and de-escalation techniques are really important. So these are 5 cases that I picked out that I thought had some implications for all of us, and it does point out the necessity for being proactive versus reactive. I want to thank you for paying attention to the presentation. I'm anxious to see what everybody else has selected, and I look forward to learning more from each of you. Thank you for your time.